Good evening and welcome to Dark Hour Paranormal. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We've had a very nice day here, or a string of nice days, I should say, in Massachusetts, and I figured I'd take the opportunity to go to location, one that I have not visited yet, and of course this is becoming somewhat scarce in way of resource out here because I'm basically hitting everything. But today we are in the Bloodtown State Forest. Now, this particular stretch of land was named Blood Forest because the donor, Arthur Blood, obviously was in his surname. However, the reason I'm here today is because it has been purported that this stretch of woods is incredibly haunted. Now, the legend goes, and I think this is probably more in the way of superstition than anything, maybe folklore, is that Arthur C. Blood, at the end of his life, or close to it, was taking people out in the woods, killing them and hanging them. Now, of all accounts that I've found, this again does seem like folklore, and yet people still experience apparitions, whispered running through the woods. They hear all kinds of screams in here, and of course you get your patented feeling of dread walking through these woods. Now, personally, coming out here, I do feel a bit of an uneasy atmosphere, if you will, but it's nothing that's really pinging red flags for me in way of what might be here or what might not be here. Truth of the matter is, there are a lot of winding trails, and it's somewhat close to sunset. I don't want to stray too far, because as far as I understand, many of these are not clearly marked. Now, one of the curious things about these trails is that you'll find a lot of marked trees. But the problem is they're not marking trails, they're marking to be felled. And there have been people who have confused these markings with trail markings and unfortunately gotten lost out here. So we're going to try to keep that from happening and all the while document whatever we can. Now, while I'm out here, I might as well look for evidence of elementals, Bigfoot, and any other cryptos that might be in these woods. This is pretty curious. I mean, this one tree is completely toppled, and to just give you a scope of how large the root system is that we can see, unbelievable. Look at this. Left a hole in the earth's surface here, probably a couple feet deep, filled with water. Now, one of the things that I understand is that there was a lot of new growth in this forest around the 1930s. And the reason for that is because there was a very catastrophic hurricane that swept through the area and really knocked the hell out of this forest. Are we still seeing some remnants of that? Obviously, not this particular piece, but could this be growth left over from that time period? This is pretty interesting. I would say this was created by somebody with a very artistic mind, but at the same time, the rocks they chose were pretty chiseled out here in way of some sort of design. I mean, maybe it's the slate, but this looks like it was cut. This is really smooth and really angular, as is the one underneath. Again, this may be the slate chipping away, but again, to have this sort of angle is quite unnatural in my opinion. Now, there are many people who have come into this forest and claim that they don't feel anything supernatural, there's nothing esoteric about this place. So let's discuss why that might be the case. In many examples, if somebody sees something or experiences something and you don't, does that mean it didn't happen? Does it mean that it wasn't true for them? For me, most of this has to do with circumstance. You're in the right place, at the right time, at the right frequency, to act as an antenna, because essentially that's what we do, and we pick up whatever comes through at that moment. So you'll have instances where people will come through this stretch of woods and not feel a thing in way of what we're mentioning here. In the same breath of the word, there have been many reports that counter that, and in fact, right now, I'm starting to get something here. Just as I walked past this body of water, I started feeling the presence of spirit. Now, is this overwhelming in any sense? No. But is it maybe an indication that something is here? Yes. So, again, a lot of these experiences are very individual and tend to be very personal. So when you attempt to recreate some of these experiences, you may have varying results, which is not great for science, right? Of course, there's quite a bit of swamp area on these lands, and you can even hear some of the trickling water as the snow and ice is still melting from this past winter. It still makes it feel a little bit impassable in certain areas, if you will. Okay, I have to tell you that as I'm walking further in here, as soon as I hit this clearing, I feel like I'm being watched from all angles, if that makes any sense. Originally, I was looking up to my left here, and I have to tell you that as I've, kind of concentrated on that area to see if I could feel anything, it's omnipresent. So, again, what does that mean? I don't know definitively, but I will tell you that it is certainly something you can feel, and therefore, we put it under the category of an experience.
If you listen closely, I captured an EVP that's reminiscent of wildlife, but nothing was audible while I was in the field.
As soon as I hit this clearing, I feel like I'm being watched from all angles.
It almost sounds as if this is an owl within the environment, but again, nothing was audible while I was in the woods, and this is also reminiscent of some of the other EVPs that I've captured, where it sounds much closer to my microphone than it should be.
As soon as I hit this clearing, I feel like I'm being watched from all angles. As soon as I hit this clearing, I feel like I'm being watched from all angles. I certainly don't want to go too far in here because, as I mentioned, a lot of these trails wind and twist on each other, so it's kind of difficult to get your bearings at a certain point here. There is a legend that talks about a man and a woman who came up here to casually camp. I think it was back in the 70s, but don't quote me on that. Unfortunately, they were killed, and nobody ever solved that mystery. This could be chalked up to a vagrant of some sort, somebody who was out here who wasn't supposed to be. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's supernatural, but may lend to the supernatural nature of this area, especially if the majority of it is sitting in the land. Now, there are well over 125 acres to explore on this plot, which is obviously quite a daunting task for one person to undertake, not to mention that most of this doesn't seem very navigable. So, where do we sit when it comes to a place like this with such immensity in way of topography to cover? We can only take the slivers of anecdotal evidence that we've had and try to corroborate that when walking through these spaces, and happen chance that it gives us the same experience. The fact of the matter remains that this is just one more purportedly haunted place in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, of course, along with some of the other colonial states, has seen its share of bloodshed and, for certain reason, possibly political gain or territory, but also to condemn those who had different belief systems than those of the Puritans and other groups just like them. The problem is that a lot of this energy seems to be encapsulated here still. So what does that mean in way of what we experience in England or some of these older areas in Europe that were built in the 1200s, 1300s, and yet still have apparitions associated with the properties? Once again, we come back to the all-telling theory, and that is energy can neither be created nor destroyed, so therefore it has to go somewhere. Our question has always been, does the sentience go with it? Or do we become something more analogous or automatic in way of this spiritual energy that we all embody? Thank you so much for joining us here once again on Dark Hour Paranormal, and believe me, there is so much more to come, so stay tuned. Cheers!